Hello and welcome to the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation CISM Live Series. My name is Kelly and I'll be your host for today's discussion. Today we're joined by guest speakers Dr. Richard Ottenstein and Dr. Beth Hewett. Dr. Richard Ottenstein is the Chief Executive Officer of the Workplace Trauma Center. He has over 45 years of experience in the mental health field and 25 years experience providing workplace trauma training and intervention services. Dr. Ottenstein is a licensed psychologist, a certified employee assistance professional, and a certified trauma specialist, and a member of the faculty at the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation. Dr. Ottenstein is a former chair of the Central Maryland chapter of the American Red Cross Disaster Mental Health Team and has served with the Red Cross on numerous national and local disasters. He's a volunteer with the Carroll County, Maryland Fire Department's CIT team and is the clinical coordinator of that team. He directs a program of distance counseling support for journalists in the Middle East as well. Dr. Beth Hewett is a certified thanatologist with the Association for Death Education and Counseling, or ADEC. She is also a certified end-of-life specialist, a certified grief movement specialist, and a certified pet loss specialist. Additionally, Dr. Hewett holds a Death and Grief Studies certificate from the Center of Loss and Life Transition and was a commissioned National Catholic Ministry for the former Bereaved Incorporated Minister of Consolation Trainer. She's a former public speaker and facilitator of grief support groups, bereavement seminars and retreats, and writing workshops. She works with the bereaved individually as a grief coach and companion. Welcome both Dr. Ottenstein and Dr. Hewett.
Thank you so much for having us.
So before we get into today's discussion, I just want to express to all of our viewers how excited we are to offer this YouTube live series and resources free. We want to improve this series in 2022 and make it even better for all of our viewers. If you have a few minutes, please make sure to click on the link in the description below and fill out this survey and let us know what topics you would like to see discussed next year. We appreciate all of your feedback and look forward to hearing from you on that survey. So today we're going to discuss grief within the workplace and ways that we can provide support to individuals within the workforce. So can you both explain why you guys decided to write a book called Supporting a Grieving Workforce?
Absolutely. People spend about a third of their lives at work. That's a lot of time. You think about that. In fact, the other third of their lives are spent sleeping. So that's quite a bit of time at work. And it's important to realize that grief doesn't stop at the workplace door. According to the Centers for Disease Control, nearly 3 million people died in 2019 in the U.S. alone. Why is that important? Nearly 3 million people died, and people are at work, and they have spouses, and they have family members, and they have other people that they love who have died. In one study, Wilson and her colleagues in 2021 found that of 131 organizations that were studied, 80 reported that one or more of the employees took bereavement leave in that year. 80. However, most employees, and this is really important to understand, Kelly, most employees return to work after only a few days of leave. And bereavement leave is usually about 3 to 5 days, very, very short, which means that bereavement grief probably is having an unrecognized and unacknowledged impact on organizations, something they just haven't thought about. People are coming back to work when they're not really ready. So we thought this would be a good time to promote an increased awareness about how grief can make people feel alone in a crowd. Rick?
Yeah, I'd like to add that it's really important for employees to feel like their management cares about what they're going through. And by providing support, it helps to reinforce the sense of employees that they are not just a cog in a wheel, but they are a real person that management recognizes that they have at times special needs. And I think the other thing is the way in which management handles grief and bereavement and loss is a major concern. And what we want to do is really make sure that when management approaches and deals with these situations, they make the right steps. And we felt that we could share our experiences through this book to help educate other critical incident responders that may be providing this support, as well as for managers and employees to really understand what they're dealing with. So that's what our intent was in putting this together.
Well, I appreciate you both answering that. So you kind of touched upon this, but if you can elaborate, why should employers provide grief support within the workplace?
Okay, I think the first thing is by informing and educating management in appropriate ways to support employees with grief, we can build those, or they can build those positive relationships with their employees. For example, I've been to many workplace grief support meetings, and sometimes only a couple of people come for the support. And management will say to me, you know, I'm really sorry. I feel like we wasted your time. And my answer to that is no, you haven't. Because what you'll find is that employees will report back to you that they appreciate the fact that you had someone there. And even if they choose not to use it, they know that management is being sensitive to the needs of the work group. And that itself is valuable in and of itself. And then, of course, helping the management and coworkers to avoid making the mistakes in trying to address these issues is very important, because some of the mistakes that can be made can be very, very painful. And Beth, you have a story about that. Did you want to share that?
I do, because I think it's really important to understand. There's a bereaved father that I'm working with, and he and his wife suffered a terrible loss of their 2-day-old infant while they still were at the hospital. There was nothing that could be done to save their little daughter because she died of an undetected genetic disorder. While he and his wife were spending time off work after she returned home from the hospital with empty arms, he received a call from the Human Resources Department, where the person in charge explained to him that he could not be taking any paternity leave at this point because he was no longer a father. And he was devastated again to hear that, and argued, but I'm a father who's grieving. And that devastating message could have been avoided had there been some education about how to sensitively convey the needs of the company, how they could separate out what is paternity, what is bereavement, what is regular leave, and also whether they could have taken the step of being flexible at that point and never making that kind of a call at all.
Thanks. That really focuses on the need to really guide management in stepping through this. And so many times I've been on site where the managers say, we don't know what to do. We don't know how to deal with this. They may have dealt with other deaths, but there may be something different about this one, and they're as much in the dark as anyone else. And we can help them to understand what the needs of the workforce are and to help them develop options to address it. So I think it's very important.
I mean, because it's bad enough. It's a difficult situation for any individual or family to have to undergo any type of grieving process when they lose someone, but especially, when organizations come back and, are kind of a little bit cut and dry, I guess, so to speak, with regard to how they deliver that information. I agree with you guys. It should be thought about.
Cut and dry or cold and heartless.
It could be, depending on how the individual perceives it. Yes. When you're undergoing duress, extreme duress, such as losing a loved one, there's a lot of things that go through individuals' minds at that point in time, and it is a process, as we all know. So what do we need to understand then, I guess, about grief in order to provide support?
Well, I suppose let's go back to my former example there. And one thing is that once something is perceived, once something has been said to the bereaved, that can't be taken back. The person will remember it, and it will color the relationship going forward. So the need for sensitivity and some education about how to work with grief, particularly in the workplace where people are spending 1/3 of their lives, is very important. So grief and mourning are different. I have always found it really useful to understand that grief and mourning are two different things. Grief is a passive set of feelings that comes on us unbidden and unexpected sometimes when we get the news that something horrible has happened to someone we love, or even to something that we love. For example, the loss of a job, or the loss of a friendship, or even when we have something good happening, like a retirement, we can grieve that. Mourning is what we do with the grief. And so mourning is a set of or series of actions, and that's not a series that happens in a lockstep 1, 2, 3, but rather recurring actions that we might do to help us feel better. And one mourning action is crying. Another one is telling a story about our loved one, telling the story of how we got together, talking about when I started working at this particular organization. That's a mourning activity for someone who's retiring. Having a funeral, having a memorial service, these are all mourning activities, and they should be encouraged. Another thing that needs to be understood, and I'm not ragging on companies here, but because I know they need to have policies, but I think they also need to think them through. A 3 to 5 day traditional bereavement leave just doesn't cut it for most people, because most people are still in a phase of feeling numb and shocked. And that's just barely enough time to get people through a funeral in the best of times. Another thing that we should know is that there's a cultural sense that after about 6 months, people ought to be all better. And that's not a realistic expectation either, because at about 6 months after a loss, people are just starting to realize that they're not dreaming. This is real. It really happened. And so when they hear things like, it's been 6 months, aren't you feeling better yet? People who are hearing those messages may feel as if they're doing something wrong, when in fact they're exactly where they need to be in terms of grieving the loss that they've had. And then another thing I'd just like to share is the notion of presenteeism and absenteeism. And that studies have shown that while absenteeism after a loss may go down, there are cost loss effects of presenteeism in terms of productivity. So over time, people may be coming to work more often, but may not be as effective as we would expect them to be post loss. which means that we need to figure out how to support them so that they can continue to work, make a living, and add to whatever the organization is doing, but that they can also continue to work with their newly functioning brains on grief. Those are just a few of the thoughts I had. Did you want to add anything, Rick?
Yes, I have a couple of things I want to share. One of the things I'd like to make sure that I inform the grieving workforce, say when they've lost a coworker or a group of people that have lost a friend, is to help them to see that grief is good. And when I tell people that, they sometimes look at me kind of strange, like, how can this be good if it's so painful? And what I ask them to look at is the fact that grief is good because it's a direct reflection of the loving and caring they had for a person. And as such, it's a positive thing. Most people try to avoid grief because it's painful. And when they do that, they're not allowing themselves to feel the feelings that they need to work through. So I encourage them to embrace the grief, to understand that it'll come in waves, and by accepting it and working with it, they can really understand the relationship they had with the person that has passed, and they can take care of themselves the best way possible. So that's one important thing that I think I want to emphasize, is making sure that we don't cut people off from their grief, that we encourage and allow them to experience it.
Well, Rick, I certainly appreciate you elaborating on that, because I think it is an important topic, and Beth for actually providing those detailed definitions with regard to grief and bereavement, because they are two different things, as you stated. One's actionable, whereas one is more emotional based. Did I get that correct?
Well, yeah, you did pretty much. I'm talking about mourning, M-O-U-R.
Mourning. I apologize. Yeah.
The doing with the grief, and then the grief itself, we feel it, and it comes out in many different ways. And I just want to say that Rick is absolutely right. Grief is the cost of love, and most people wouldn't reel back their love and say, nope, I've decided not to love this person anymore, just so they won't grieve. Most people who are grieving recognize this and want the world to recognize it with them.
Of course, of course. So then that brings me to my next question. Why is this support especially important now?
Okay, I'll take on that question. The impact of the pandemic, almost 2 years of the pandemic, and the resulting changes in lifestyle, changes in ways that people relate, changes in the availability of customs, that such as having funerals and memorials and gatherings and working from home. All of these things have created a situation where people are really on edge. If you look at the statistics currently on the rise of mental health issues, we're seeing significant peaks in mental health concerns. The number of incidents of violence that's taking place, the social unrest. I could go on, and I won't. But all of these have left people in a pretty fragile state of mind. Even your most resilient people are struggling to cope with all of the changes, and it's not over. So it's really important to provide support when there's a loss, of coworkers, say, you've got other coworkers that have been suffering losses. Sometimes people don't even know because people aren't always talking about it because they're so worn out. Or they're not together, they're working from home, so they don't have the time and opportunity to share what's going on in their lives. But all of us have seen people who have lost 4 or 5 family members to COVID or COVID-related situations. And so it's really important to focus that support to help people to get through it, whether it be in the workplace or elsewhere. But in the workplace, it's important because it enables people to continue to do what they need to do and to take care of themselves. We also know that when we experience grief or the loss of someone we know, it often triggers grief from other losses. So that typically when we encounter a situation, say in the workplace, where people are dealing with the loss of a coworker, we also find that they're also experiencing a resurgence of grief from other losses they've had, whether it be from a similar circumstance or whether it be from something very different. And with so many people experiencing losses in the last year and a half, it's even heightened this, and helping people to understand that it is absolutely normal for people to have grief from other losses activated when they encounter the death of someone else, helps them to realize they're not losing their mind, they're not unable to cope with the losses they've had, but it's a normal part of the grieving process. So I think that that's very important in helping people to address these things. Beth, you had some comments about the holidays coming up.
I do. So this is a context that we're in as we're getting ready to air this program. The holidays are coming up. Thanksgiving is the one holiday that most Americans celebrate in one way or another. And people are starting to wonder, can I travel? Should I travel? I have health issues, or someone else does. Should we all get together inside? There's still ongoing and overhanging COVID issues. And frankly, there have been family disagreements over the past year and a half about how to handle COVID. And so all of these combine and go with any pressure or problems that people have regarding the grief that they're experiencing. So we have contextually a very high stress level right now that can add to the high stress level that people have with grief. We can call this an emotional pressure cooker. People who are grieving in normal times have a very high need to be understood and a very low capacity to be understanding. People who are grieving now, having lost people during COVID, they may not have had a funeral, they may not have been together with their family members, there may have been arguments about how to handle things. And so they're already coming into a holiday season that has high expectations for joy, and they have low capacity for joy. They have a high need for understanding, a low capacity to be understanding, and it's inevitable that there's going to be some family problems that people would prefer not to have there. So one of the things I'd like us to be sharing here and people to understand, and maybe we can teach others, is that when we all come into these kinds of situations, if we're aware of it, we may be able to come up with some coping strategies and mechanisms so that we're not as apt to be grumpy with each other. We can step away from a situation. What's happening in the home place is happening in the workplace as well. 1/3 of our lives, I keep saying, is spent in the workplace. So the better we know how to handle the stresses and the griefs that we're experiencing right now at home, the better we can handle it in the workplace too.
And to add on to that, I think that this holiday season is going to be so difficult because I don't think people are going to realize how much impact all the losses from the pandemic will have on them during the holidays. Because I think that there's a potential for it to come out for people that their loved ones that are gone or no longer there for the holidays, and just trying to find a way of making the holidays work.
Well, I definitely think that it is relevant information to be touching upon. So thank you both for providing, feedback and especially bringing awareness to that important subject as we do move into the holiday season. So how might the death of an employee affect the workforce then?
Okay, I'll start with that. So when an employee passes, of course, there's an impact on the coworkers. It may be a large impact company-wide, depending on how well known that person was, how long they were working at that facility, and also the role that the person had. Sometimes a person who's not in a managerial position may be somebody who is almost like a soul of the organization, where they're respected, they reach out to others, they always greet people and set a tone of positivity within the workplace. And when a person like that passes, the dynamics of the team can change a lot. People will often say, "What are we going to do without Joe? He was the one person that we always looked forward to talking to, and he was the one person that could make us laugh when things were really difficult." And so, just the way that I approach that is I ask people to talk about Joe and share some of those stories, and I ask them to recognize how lucky they were to work with Joe, because the fact that they met Joe was really a random thing, because the people we meet at work are kind of random, that we got this job at this time in this company, and so did Joe. So kind of recognizing and being grateful for the time they had with that person, and then asking people to look at how they can keep the positive spirit of the organization. And did you lose me?
You did, yes, we did lose you.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Okay,
You're back
with my microphone and my video, but I'm back, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. So looking at the dynamics of the team, even if the person wasn't well liked, it still impacts the dynamic. So the team has to rebalance itself, and the trigger of other losses, as we mentioned earlier, comes up. Beth, do you want to share anything on this?
Well, the company just has to keep on functioning while they hold space for the grief. The work is never done, and I think that's a balance that is difficult. And at some point, perhaps we can talk a little bit about the employee, how what to do for the employee. I thought I'd add just a personal story. My father was president of a company, and he had stepped down from president work about 6 months before he suddenly died. And I was really impressed by how much the employees who really cared about my father needed to talk about him to each other, and then, of course, to the family. And by listening on the stories that they were telling each other, I learned about my father and his impact on others and how they would miss him. I learned about a man who I only knew from a part of my life, because he spent a lot of his time, probably much more than a half of his time, at the workplace as opposed to a third. So the need to tell these stories, as Rick said, is powerful. It's mourning work, and it can help everybody who hears about it.
Well, thank you for sharing that personal story. How can we approach functional tasks like cleaning out the office space and moving a new person into it? Is that a sensitive issue? Can you guys elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I'll take that one on. It's a very sensitive issue, and it can lead to a lot of misunderstandings and a lot of anger if it's not handled appropriately. So the first thing that I advise a company to do is to carefully consider how they're going to move forward with the personal space of the person that has died, and that could be a locker, it could be an office, it could be a cubicle, it could be a bookshelf, whatever it is. The first thing to consider is the remaining coworkers, the people that were physically closest to the environment that that employee worked in are the ones that are going to be most sensitive to what happens with that space, what happens with the personal belongings. And there's lots of different ways in which people feel about that. Some people want to get things changed as quickly as possible. Other people don't want the change to happen at all. And certainly there are memorials, like makeshift memorials that come up where people will put pictures and flowers on a person's desk. And what do you do with those things, and how do you remove them without offending people? So my advice that I give to employers is the first thing is to talk with the people that will be most affected by the cleaning out of that office space, to find out what their needs are. Do they want it to be done fairly quickly? Do they want a little time to adjust? Certainly, companies need to reclaim that space and utilize it. But the timing is really important. By just doing it without talking with those employees impacted, it kind of leaves people coming in and suddenly finding that the person's kind of been wiped away. And that doesn't feel good for most people. But by letting people know, and it may not be the company's choice on some of the issues, the family may say, we want to come in tonight and take our loved one's personal effects. And the company is going to, if at all possible, grant that request. But it doesn't prevent them from letting people know that this is happening and why, that the family would like the personal belongings. Sometimes the items need to be packed up and sent to the family, in which case it may be that some people in the work group may want to participate in that as a last gift to their coworker. So again, by discussing it and working with the people most impacted, it can help to bring a sense of caring and participation, and also a little bit of movement towards closure. Those are things that I like to see happen.
Yeah, and I think that those are important things to address for sure. If you guys can go back and kind of talk a little bit more about having memorials within the workplace and kind of expand upon that, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first, I'm a big fan of memorials, and let's just say that there are a couple of kinds that we could have, but it's important to keep in mind the organization's culture and what would be approved and what would be considered appropriate and what would be appreciated. So there are these pop-up memorials that Rick was talking about, and that would be where perhaps there's some flowers and a couple of photos and a coffee mug and such, and that doesn't necessarily need to stay on the individual's desk for very long, but could perhaps be moved to a credenza in a common area where people could enjoy that kind of a memorial. And that's something that could be discussed within the workplace as to how long to keep that. But there are also more active memorials where people have an opportunity to talk about this person who has died and may get some information from each other by having that talking. And so if it seems to be right within the culture and the management approves, then there are some things to think about. For example, do we want to get everybody together in person to have a memorial service? That's a very wonderful thing to do, but I think the work culture has changed incredibly in the last 2 years, and it was changing as well, where there were more people working from home. So, do we want to do it all by Teams or Zoom or some kind of software, or do we want a hybrid setting? Because that's possible too, where we can have a camera set up and we can have people who are together in person, people who are coming in through technology, and having this all encompassing opportunity to memorialize someone in the workplace. If possible, I think it's a good idea to allow the team to help organize this rather than having one person from above, top down, making all of the organizational plans, but rather bring people in who have really experienced the loss of this individual to try and decide how do we want to make this happen. We could consider whether to make this an organization-wide type of memorial opportunity to honor perhaps a group of people who have died. And what comes to mind here are hospital settings and nursing home settings and that sort of thing, where not only have perhaps some coworkers died, but coworker family members and possibly likely patients. And so there may be a desire to honor the entire group and try to take in and figure out how that impacts all of us. Or it may be something that we want to do that's particular to the team, looking at one individual who has died. And we think about, shall we invite the family? Would the family like to be a part of this in some way, shape, or form? And would they like to have something to say? I think it's real important, too, to be sensitive about family members who may have died. So we have perhaps a memorial of some kind happening for the workplace team. If family members also have died and workers have suffered losses that way, if they're open to it, perhaps their names might be mentioned. So there are lots of different ways to configure something like this. It's important for the company itself to figure out how can we offer something that all employees will understand they too might receive if they have a need. This is something we want to do once a year, especially given the strangeness of the past couple of years, where we'd like to plant a tree in honor of everyone who died in 2020 and 2021, or something like that. So how can we honor people and their lives and the losses in our hearts in some kind of sustainable, repeatable way? So we're needing to be very sensitive to the people, but also sensitive to how the organization can make these things happen.
And one thing I just wanted to mention, Beth, I was so impressed that you did a memorial for a horse rescue organization that was grieving the loss of their horses. Just as appropriate as any other workplace.
The horses were their team. This particular place had a herd of 12 horses and 6 died within 8 months. They lost half their team. And so it was incredibly important for them to have solid, actionable ways to mourn that loss in order to figure out how will our organization continue in the future.
Wow, that's incredible. So how can we handle it when an employee's spouse or family member dies? And can you guys kind of provide insight? Because we do have a lot of first responder, crisis responder viewers. So if you guys can provide some specific tips or helpful information from that perspective, I think that that would be important because a lot of our crisis responders are on call all the time, or are on shift, and their family is important to them. So
Yes. I'll start. Supporting the employee, of course, giving that employee the things that we've mentioned earlier in terms of bereavement leave and supporting and sensitivity, and helping the workforce understand how to best support that grieving colleague in terms of things to say, things not to say, and I think we're going to get into that in just a moment. But really helping people to understand how to welcome back the person that's been grieving back to work, how to bridge that chasm between grieving and coming back to work, and make it human, make it work. Beth, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, let me give you some specifics on things that coworkers can do for each other. Gleaned not only from my own personal experience, but from what is just good help for people who are grieving. Please acknowledge that this person has had a loss and not just ignore it like an elephant in the room. Elephants in the room crowd us out, and we really need to name what they are. So ask, how are you? And stand there to listen for whatever the response is. Say, I'm sorry, or I'm sorry for your loss. But I don't think you have to come up with very special things to say at the moment. Just say, I'm sorry, and see what happens. What often will happen is just the fact that you mentioned and acknowledged that, I'll use myself, that I had a loss, may bring up tears. So expect and accept tears in the people around you. Did you know that if I hand you a tissue when you're crying, you might think, I should stop crying. Take the tissues, blow my nose, and just put the whole thing away. So it's a funny thing that tissues can close down tears. It's great to have them available and let those who are grieving grab them as needed. Please use the deceased person's name. So if you don't know the name, you can say, Jim, I'm really sorry about your wife's death. Can you tell me about her? And what was her name? How did she like to be called? If you're a little bit embarrassed that you don't know her name, how did she like to be called? Provide some time to listen to this story, because the story about Jim's wife is a love story. And so it's okay to listen, and it's really okay to listen to it more than once, because Jim's going to need to talk about her more than once. And if you have some willingness to help, you can ask, is there anything I can do to help? How can I help you best as you're coming back to work, as Rick was saying? What would you like me to pick up on the Johnson account and work with that? Or can I get someone to ride with you in the truck this week? Or something like that. Is there anything I can do, but also some specifics that might be useful?
I think those are all very helpful tips for that coworkers can actually achieve. After a coworker or a peer comes back to work during that time. How can we approach good grief support when an employee dies who has other family members working in the organization or at the facility?
Okay, I think that's an important question because we've seen this many times where maybe it's a family business and one of the family members has passed, or maybe it's a business where uh, people are encouraged to invite their friends and family to work at the facility. And so you may have multiple relationships of people in a facility. And in a large facility, they may be in completely separate work groups. And so the first thing we have to do is triage the situation in terms of the relationships of the grieving spouse and family members, and to address targeted support to each of the work groups that are impacted by that loss. Recently, my organization was supporting a school where a child was killed in a pedestrian accident, and there were three schools involved because in one school, the parent of the child was a teacher. Another school, the child that died was a student there. And in the third school, the accident happened right in front of the school. So it was very targeted focus on each of those groups. And so we need to do that triage and figure out where we need to provide that support. So that's one of the things. And looking at the interconnection, sometimes maybe somebody worked on a midnight shift. So the company's focusing the support rightfully on the night shift and the people there. But we need to ask the question, did this person work on other shifts as well? And the answer, if it's, yeah, they worked on the day shift for 10 years and then 6 months ago transferred to the night shift. So we know that there's going to be a lot of people on the day shift that need support. So we would encourage providing that support on that other shift. So understanding those relationships and providing the kind of things we've talked about earlier. Some of it would be supporting a family member, some of it would be supporting the deceased coworkers. So whatever it is.
Much more complex than we would think at first, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, it's not as easy or cut and dry as one would think or assume. That's for sure. So then that kind of brings me into my next question. What are some specific things that managers can do to assist those that are undergoing that grieving process?
I'll take this. I think the first thing that I think what can managers do at the organizational level to sort of make everything easier at some point? Let me just start there, and that is get some education about how to deal with loss and grief to support their workforce, like our book, frankly, and be open to bringing in a grief specialist for professional development. And so trying to head this off at the pass, knowing that so many million people die each year in the United States. People work a third of their time. This is going to affect the workforce. There's no getting around it. And so let's provide some education to support the whole organization before someone's death impacts individuals and teams and such. And then the other, from a more micro perspective, again, asking how are you and really meaning it, standing there listening to the person who has lost someone, the team that has lost someone. How can we support you in this challenging time? No, tears come up, I promise you, because we are very tender when we're grieving, but also we're very tender when someone genuinely cares. And accepting that is important. Accepting that tenderness is important because workers worry that if they show weakness, they may not be considered okay to do their jobs. So it's a really delicate situation. Consider whether you want to acknowledge the loss both privately and publicly. So think about how to acknowledge the loss among the workers and then among the workers' family members, contacting out to family members and acknowledging that with a card or something. We talked about having a corporate memorial service if that seemed like an appropriate thing. At an assisted living for people in the memory care unit most recently, we did a memorial where all of the photos of the people who had died, and that was staff as well as people who were patients there, were provided. Everybody had a chance to speak about one of the photos, and then the photos were put up on a bulletin board in the photo montage. And that was approved at the corporate level so that everybody's privacy was taken care of. There were no names attached, that sort of thing. But having something like that gave the workers at the memory care unit an opportunity to cry and to talk about, I really loved working with so-and-so. It was really not fun working with so-and-so, or, this person turned the shower head on me and got me soaking wet, that sort of thing. So telling stories there. Managers could consider making some kind of a tangible gift, flowers to individuals, a plant, or plant a tree in honor of all, or a charitable contribution at the end of the year that names all of the people being honored. And I think I started to say earlier that we really need to be careful about what can be done for all employees versus just one. I'm studying a case of Delta Airlines and one of their airline attendants who lost her entire family in a small plane crash. And Delta pulled out all the stops and really took care of this airline attendant and made sure that she was able to stay at home for as long as she needed. And it was an amazing opportunity for an organization of that size to take care of one of its own. But it can't do it for everybody. And so the organization also built in some ways to support the bereaved on a peer-to-peer level. And that's really an important type of thing to do too, is to make sure that everyone knows that when it happens to me, I'll be taken care of and that we can take care of each other.
And I've seen some amazing things that companies have done. And at times I need to, I feel I am responsible to point out to them, are you sure you want to do this? What might be the impact later on with someone else's death? And one case in point is a company I've worked with over the years, and they had an employee die in an industrial accident at their facility. And the president of the company decided to, the wife of that person was not going to be able to afford to keep the house that they lived in because she was ill. And so he decided for the company to pay off the mortgage of the house. And the only thing I said to him, I said, I think that's a wonderful thing to do. But what I would suggest is you look into what the possible repercussions could be of that as a precedent to other circumstances, so that you don't end up obligating the company to do that for others. And they talked with their legal department and found that they could do it, and they wanted to do it, and they did it. It was amazing. So you see all different kinds of things that can happen and that can be done. Now, just a couple of points. I think we've kind of gone through pretty much everything. But a couple of tips. One is, don't try to fix anything. We can't fix what's already happened. And when we try to fix things, we usually make them worse. So in terms of things not to say, oh, you'll get over it, it'll get better, you have other kids, or you can always remarry, you're young. None of that helps. Just what I say is being a compassionate presence and listening and providing an opportunity for people to feel heard is the best that we can do. And as professionals, those of us who provide this type of support, we can help guide people to follow a path that is effective for them, but we cannot fix it. And when we try, we fail. So I just wanted to share that.
Well, thank you both. Do you guys have any final thoughts with regard to this discussion on grief within the workforce? You guys have provided so much information already. But any final thoughts for either one of you?
No.
No?
Or what I'd like to say is, for those people that are listening that are first responders, thank you for doing what you do. And those people that provide support in the workplace as critical incident responders, thank you for doing that as well.
I'll echo that. I'll echo that, Rick.
Well, that's a great way to kind of end this this heavy discussion on a very important topic. And for all of our crisis responders, mental health providers that are out there watching all of us as we talk about this important discussion in the CISM Live Series, we do want to say thank you for all that you do. You guys are continuing to make a difference each and every day and putting your life on the line to help others and to keep everyone safe. So thank you. And thank you both, Beth and Rick, for joining me today to talk about this important topic. It is something that it can be upsetting, but I believe it is important to touch upon and kind of open that discussion a little bit for both employers as well as employees and peers.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Kelly. We appreciate this opportunity to talk with you.
Now, if you guys have enjoyed our discussion today and would like to learn more about Dr. Ottenstein and Dr. Hewett's book called Supporting a Grieving Workforce, you can actually purchase the softcover and the online ebook by visiting our CISM bookstore. We have a link in the description below, so just click on that link. It'll take you right to their book that they both co-authored, and you can learn more about that topic. Dr. Ottenstein is also an ICISF faculty member, and he does have a course titled Corporate Crisis Response, Critical Incident Stress Management in the Workplace. To learn more about this course and actually request it through our Speakers Bureau program, you can visit ICISF.org or just click on the link below to kind of learn more about that course overall. The ICISF also offers a variety of free resources for anyone interested in CISM or helping their peers and coworkers. To learn more and download free resources today, you can actually visit our website at icisf.org/resources. Thank you again, Rick and Beth, for joining me today to discuss grief within the workforce. We will have contact information if you have any additional questions for either of my guest speakers today in the description. So keep an eye out for that. And if you found today's discussion to be beneficial, make sure to give this video a thumbs up or even leave a comment down below. Until next time, we'll see you all then.